had a burden. I was putting that burden in my bag, and I was carrying it around, and I was weary. That night I went in and I listened to Charles Swindoll. At that time it was called New Standard for Living, now it's called Insight for Living. And he was talking on John. You remember in book of John where Christ took the bread and the fish, and Swindoll said he gave thanks before there was the multiplication. And it was as clear as if I audibly heard God's voice, and he said, Lee, you need to give me thanks. So that night, tears running down my cheeks, I was thanking God for a job. I had told Shannon that day that if something didn't come up this week, that she would have to drop out of school. We'd have to go move in with her parents or something, because we couldn't pay anything. That was a Friday night. Monday morning, I had 3 job offers. 2 of them I had. So we move on to another, about a year later. We're in Shadron, Nebraska. For some reason, God takes us to these places that are out nowhere. And Shadron was about 3,000 people. And I started at the college there. We had an extension campus that was 100 miles away, exactly 100 miles, because I always had to fill out the log. One way, 100 miles. We passed no towns. You could count the number of farms on your hand in between 100 miles. We're out in the middle of nowhere. So we came. I started teaching in January, and when I came, they said, did you want to be paid 9 months or 12 months? And that is, you take my salary and you divide it by 9 or divide it by 12. And I said, well, I want to be paid by 12 months. June 1st came, I went down to my mailbox, no paycheck. June 2nd came, I went down to my mailbox, no paycheck. June 3rd came, I went to my mailbox, no paycheck. So I went into Chris, a financial officer. I said, Chris, I didn't get paid. And he said, no, Lee. He said, you won't get paid for the next 3 months. I said, but I said I went paid 12 months. He said, yeah, but you came in the middle of the year, so you know that doesn't start until you start in January. And I said to him, well, what am I going to do? We used all of our savings to move there. We didn't have anything. You know, we're living in this small town. Where am I going to get a job? There's no jobs. So I walked from our house to the campus. It was a 45-minute walk or so. So I'm walking home. I really have a burden on me, and I'm really weary. What am I going to do? So as I was walking, I began to cry out to the Lord. I went through this pasture field walking home. So when I say cry out, I mean I was talking out loud. And as I began to come to, I started feeling the burden being lifted. I realized I was given rest. And so when I got home to tell my wife we weren't going to get paid for the next 3 months, I felt pretty good. And I told her, we're not going to get paid for the next 3 months. And she cried. And so we prayed together as a couple. We came to. It was just a day or so later, I got a call from a pastor friend. And he said, Lee, the church wants you and Shannon to come and do a VBS. And they want one for the kids, and they want one for the adults. I liked when he said this. And they want to pay you really well. So I thought, there was another friend that lived there, and they wanted us to stay with them. I told Shannon, well, you know, we might as well do it because we don't have to buy food, right? And all the other expenses. So we went there, and Shannon said to me, she said, listen, we can't tell a person that for 3 months we're not getting paid. So we went, we did the VBS. The last Sunday I spoke, and then as we left, different people would shake our hands. Now, make sure you listen to this. Different people shook our hands and gave us envelopes. And as we left the town, I said to Shannon, I said, open the envelopes. As we did, a couple $100 in this, a few $100 in that, and a few $100 in that. People would give us these. God told me I was to give this to you. God told me I would give this to you. Right? So, a burden. We were weary. We came to, and there was rest. Now, to be fair, I have to tell you another story. Because I want to be honest. So, we're living in Chadron. Our first daughter was born. The hospital is not much bigger than your church. It was emergency cesarean. The surgeon had to fly in. He had his own plane, so he had to fly in to Chadron to have that. So next children are being born, cesarean, so you plan it so he doesn't have to fly in. So they're doing an ultrasound on our third child. And I was coming from the college to meet Shannon, and she was bringing the 2 kids there. And so as they were doing the ultrasound, I was holding a child on each arm so they could watch the monitor, they could see their sister, right? That was the idea. And after a while, the doctor said, Lee, you need to take the children out. And so later he came out and he said, Lee, he said, you'll want to abort the baby. He said, it'll be just a mess. He said, you won't want to do this. You can't do it here in Nebraska, but if you go over to Colorado, you can still do it. Now, you talk about a burden. That was probably one of the heaviest burdens I ever had to put on. So Shannon takes the kids, put them in the car, go home. I'm riding behind the bike, and I'm riding, and I'm crying out, God, what do we do? What do we do? We got home. We called some friends. They came over, and we had a prayer meeting. If you would say to Shannon, when did you feel the closest to God? She'd probably tell you, when I was carrying Kristen. No, I tell you that story because, you see, we had a burden. We came to. God gave us rest. We didn't get what we wanted. Our daughter lived for 36 hours. Notice it says, come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. It doesn't say, I will give you whatever you want. No, he'll give you rest. sometimes we don't get what we want. But in those hard times, we can have rest. Let me just say, Lee, come on. I know you gave us those examples in your life, but come on, really? Listen, is the Word of God true? If it is, then it says, if you are heavy laden, if you have this burden on you, and if you are weary, it says, I will give you rest. I would imagine a congregation this size that there's a number of us that are heavy laden, and we're quite weary. And what Jesus is telling the people of that day, he's saying, Dute piras me. Come to me. To close relationship, an intimate fellowship. That's what he wants. Christ wants your heart. That's what he wants. And will you give him your heart? When am I supposed to be done? I always worry about time. Be honest with me. 25. Oh, so I have lots of time, right? Okay. All right, so that's just the first verse, right? Now, he kind of parallels this when he goes into the second verse. You remember the words he says, take my yoke. Oh, wait. The Pharisees was putting a yoke upon the people. Look, you want to be, I'm using today's terms, you want to be saved? Oh, these are all the things you have to do. These are all the things you can't do. Right? They had books of them. They had books just for what you can and can't do for the Sabbath. Now, that was pretty heavy burdens on the people. So it was a yoke. And so Christ is saying, take my yoke, and put it upon you. No, when I was doing this, I was thinking of Uncle Elwood. I'd like to have asked Uncle Elwood some questions. Uncle Elwood, these things he knew. But from what I read, right, here was this yoke, right? So you could take two oxen, and you could hook them together, right? This wooden bar that would go across them, and then, you could pull things behind them, a cart or whatever, you could pull it behind them. And they said that lots of times what you would do is you would take this big old ox, and you put a young ox with it. And the big old ox would do most of the work. And the young old ox would just kind of follow along, kind of learn the trade. And I thought, whoa, this is Christ. Hope he doesn't strike me for this. Christ is the big old ox. And we are that young old ox. He wants to do the work. Right? So it's like, Lee, you have a financial problem, can't get a job? Come to me. I can give you one. They're not going to pay you for 3 months? Well, come to me. I'll do the work. Right? So Christ is the big ox. He does the work. And we just kind of follow along. So he says, come to me, right? And take my yoke upon you and learn from me. So we are to learn from Christ. So come to him. We take that yoke, we put it upon, we learn for him. And notice, he describes himself then. He tells us about himself. He says, "For I am gentle and lowly in heart." And again he says, "and you will find rest." We let him do the work. He's the big ox. We let him do the work. And as little or young ox, as it learns to work the fields like it was supposed to, from this, by following along the big ox, as we come to Christ, we learn about him and we see his characteristics, and we learn that we can trust upon him. And he says, again, and you will find rest for your soul. As I was studying this one song came to my mind. And when I was home, I like Brooke. Then she was Brooke Fraser. And so I was listening to it over and over and over as she was singing this chorus. Listen, the word says, "Turn your eyes upon Jesus, look full in his wonderful face, and the things of the earth will grow strangely dim in the light of his glory and grace." Listen to the words again. It says, "Turn your eyes upon Jesus, look full in his wonderful face." That's come to me. That's what the song is saying. Come to me. And the things of earth, that's the burdens that makes us weary. And the things of earth, right? It says, and the things of earth will grow strangely dim. Oh, that's rest, isn't it? So, what Christ wants us to do, and several of the songs that we sang, that's what we sang this morning. What Christ wants us to do is to come to him daily, right? I don't care how long you've been a Christian. We still need to grow. We still need to have a closer relationship. One of my favorite phrases in the Bible, and it says, "and the two shall become one." And over the years, I understand more and more about, and the two shall become one. And that's what Christ wants us. He wants us to become together with him. You know, this is not, you get up, you have a 2-minute prayer in the morning. That's just not what he's talking about. He's talking about pouring your heart out to him. He's talking about spending a good amount of time with him. When we learned about Kristen, we spent hours and hours in prayer. In those months to come, hours and hours in prayer. That's what made us close with Christ. And so Christ is saying, come to me. I'm sure Christ, on that day, he was saying, people, I don't know how much more to stress it to you than saying, I want to have a close relationship with you. And Christ is saying today, I want to have a close relationship to you. I've given you the invitation. Come to me. I've given you that invitation. Will you come? Will you come?
Thank you, Brother Lee. Appreciate that message. And it's something that we all need to take to heart. We need to come closer and closer to Christ each and every day in our daily devotions and in our walk with him. At this time, let us stand and have our closing song.